Gravel tore into David's bare feet as he ran, each breath sharp like broken glass. Behind him, shadows stretched unnaturally, silent figures pursuing without footsteps. He whispered, "They won't take me too," but fear betrayed his voice. A locked iron door slammed ahead, sealing freedom behind steel. Panic surged as whispers hissed his name from the trees, soft and poisonous. "David, come back!" The night air reeked of smoke and damp earth, carrying the weight of rituals unspoken. He clawed at the door, fingernails scraping rust, while the darkness closed. His heart thundered like a drum of war. A sudden light flickered, pale, unnatural, almost holy. His chest froze with dread as a shadowy hand reached forward. This nightmare wasn't waiting. It was already here. David pressed his back to the iron door, chest heaving. "Please, open," he gasped, though no one was there. A crow shrieked overhead, the sound tearing through silence. The forest pressed in, alive with whispers. Every shadow seemed to breathe, closer now, circling him like prey. He could hear his name, drawn out in voices that belonged to friends long gone. "Michael, Sarah." His throat burned as he whispered their names. Nothing but the echo returned, yet the forest groaned as if answering. His eyes darted across the trees, but no body appeared. Only shapes, flickering, waiting. The night sky above seemed too close, like it would crush him. His heart raced faster, as if it knew something terrible was about to step forward. The forest trembled with soundless weight, as if the ground itself breathed beneath David's feet. He whispered, "This isn't real," but his trembling hands betrayed him. Then came the whistle, high, piercing, unnatural. His eyes darted, searching the tree line. A shadow detached itself, moving with fluid grace, silent as smoke. David's pulse pounded. His mind screamed to run, but his legs refused. He froze, a hunted animal in the jaws of fate. The whistle grew louder, sharper, closer, until it felt like knives in his ears. The trees bent toward him, branches arching, framing the figure emerging from darkness. He forced his lips to move, trembling, "God, help me." No answer came. Only the sound of his heartbeat, deafening, relentless. Branches snapped. David flinched. The figure stepped forward, tall, cloaked in shifting black, its face a hollow blur. The air thickened, crushing his chest. His nails dug into his palms as he whispered, "Not you, not again." A faint memory flashed. Sarah's face, pleading, before vanishing into shadow months ago. His knees buckled, pressing him to the gravel. "I won't follow," he shouted, but the words cracked, breaking into sobs. The shadow halted, its head tilting like it listened. Then it raised its hand, fingers long and skeletal. The forest leaned closer, silence, swelling, heavy and complete. For a heartbeat, David thought he heard Sarah's voice again, whispering through the mist, "Come home." His tears blurred the nightmare, but the hand did not falter. The night cracked open with a scream. David's throat burned as he cried, "Stay away." His voice echoed into the emptiness. The shadow dissolved, vanishing into mist. Relief never came. Instead, the ground quaked beneath him, gravel shifting as if something beneath stirred awake. A chilling cold wrapped around his ankles, tugging like unseen fingers. He clawed at the earth, desperate to break free. His breath caught as the forest erupted in whispers, countless voices chanting his name. "David, David." They rose in unison, drowning his heartbeat. His body convulsed, muscles trembling, terror clawing deeper than bone. He pressed his palms to his ears, screaming against the sound. But the whispers lived inside him now, and there was nowhere left to run. David sat in the dimly lit room, his head bowed as candlelight flickered against peeling walls. He remembered the night he first stumbled into their circle, broken by loss and searching for hope. "We can give you family," the voice of Thomas, the leader, had promised, smooth and soothing like silk draped over a blade. David had wanted to believe because the world outside had already taken everything. His sister gone, his parents distant, his soul hungry for meaning. Around him that night, strangers smiled with warmth that felt real, their hands steady as they touched his shoulders. He whispered to himself now, I just wanted to belong. The memory ached like a wound reopening, and for a moment, the fear of the forest faded into the deeper ache of longing. The first meal he shared with them lingered in his memory. A long wooden table stretched through the hall, plates filled with simple bread and soup. Yet to David, starving from days of loneliness, it tasted like salvation. Rachel, a young woman seated across from him, smiled kindly, pressing an extra piece of bread into his hand. You look like you need this more than me, she had said. He remembered her eyes, kind yet hollow, as if she had already given too much of herself. That night, the room echoed with songs of devotion, voices rising in harmony. David's throat tightened as he joined in, his voice shaking, but welcome. This is family, he had thought, convincing himself the warmth was real. The first prayer ceremony still haunted him. Kneeling on cold stone, David listened as Thomas the leader spoke with a voice that shook the air. Here you are safe, Thomas declared, eyes glinting like fire in shadow. Around him, everyone bowed in unison, bodies swaying, voices chanting words that David barely understood. But when the sound rose, it wrapped around him like a blanket. He remembered pressing his forehead to the stone, trembling, tears slipping down his cheeks. For the first time in years, he felt seen. You belong here, whispered Sarah, a fellow member beside him, her voice gentle but firm. He clung to those words like they were rope pulling him from drowning, not realizing they were chains forming around his wrists. David remembered nights sitting with Rachel, under the dim light of lanterns, when she whispered stories of why she stayed. They said I was broken, but here I'm whole, she confessed, voice trembling as if rehearsed. He saw her smile at him, but her eyes revealed exhaustion deeper than her years. He told her of his loneliness, how he feared dying unseen. Rachel touched his hand, whispering, We don't let anyone disappear here. In that moment, David felt warmth, the illusion of connection that kept him bound. Even now, in the forest, her words echoed like a cruel promise. Thought made him ache, because beneath the chains of devotion, he had truly wanted to believe she meant it. The memory of initiation carved itself deepest. Standing in the circle, flames flickering from torches, David felt the heat of eyes upon him. Thomas stepped forward, hand pressing against David's chest. You are reborn now, Thomas said, his voice commanding and intimate. The crowd erupted in chants, names and words colliding like thunder. For one moment, David believed, truly believed, that he had found the place where he belonged. He raised his hands as instructed, his voice joining theirs, though fear and longing warred inside him. That night, they marked him with ash and tied a red cord around his wrist. He whispered, I am theirs, without realizing the cost. Now, standing years later in terror, he felt the phantom weight of that cord tightening again. The rules came first as whispers, then as chains. David remembered the list read aloud each morning, Thomas's voice echoing like thunder. Obedience, silence, devotion. Every breath was counted, every mistake noted. One evening, he dared to ask Rachel if she ever dreamed of leaving, but her face turned pale. Don't speak of that, she hissed, eyes darting toward the shadows where the enforcer often lingered. Fear wrapped around her words like barbed wire. That night, punishment was swift. A young boy forgot a verse and was struck down in front of them all, his cries drowned by chanting. David's stomach churned, his fists clenched, but he bowed his head like the rest, his silence louder than any scream. Every ritual stripped away, another layer of self. David felt it in the chants, endless and heavy words pressed into his mind like branding irons. He mouthed them because silence meant suspicion, and suspicion meant punishment. He caught glimpses of the enforcer, Daniel, standing in shadows, eyes sharp, waiting for weakness. Once, David faltered, his voice cracking during prayer, and Daniel's gaze snapped to him like a hawk catching prey. Sweat chilled his skin as he forced his voice louder, heart pounding. "Do not falter," Thomas had once told him, voice smooth but deadly. David learned that rebellion was not silence, but even hesitation. It was suffocation disguised as faith, and every day he breathed it deeper, afraid to choke. Meals turned from comfort to ritual. David remembered sitting at the long wooden table, hands folded until Thomas spoke the blessing. No one dared eat early. Once, Sarah lifted her spoon a moment too soon, and Daniel slammed his hand down, spilling soup across her lap. She whispered apologies as tears streaked her face, but no one moved to comfort her. David's fists tightened under the table. He wanted to speak, to defend her, but Rachel shook her head subtly, eyes wide with warning. The silence burned hotter than fire. When Thomas finally allowed them to eat, the food tasted like ash in David's mouth. The rules were no longer about survival. They were about breaking every shred of humanity left. The nights were the worst. David lay awake on the thin cot, the sound of whispered prayers leaking through wooden walls. Sleep came only with fear, because at any moment a lantern could flare and Daniel's hand would drag someone into the courtyard. Punishments were always public. One night, he saw Michael tied to the post, lashes cutting deep into his back, while Thomas called it purification. The crowd chanted, voices loud to drown out screams. David pressed his nails into his palms until blood welled, forcing his mouth to move in rhythm with theirs. Inside, he screamed in silence, his guilt heavier than the night. He whispered to himself, "If I speak, I die. If I stay silent, I rot." Day by day, David felt the noose tighten. He once reached for Rachel's hand during prayer, seeking warmth, but she pulled away, fear flashing in her eyes. The chains were invisible but binding. "We are one," Thomas declared daily. "There is no self." The words carved themselves into David's bones. He began to fear his own thoughts, catching himself when he remembered the world outside. The cult's grip wasn't only in rules or punishments, but in the way it made doubt feel like sin. Every glance was watched, every whisper monitored, every breath measured. He looked around the circle and realized with a hollow ache that friends had become strangers, spies who smiled but listened for his fall. David began to notice cracks. Thomas spoke of sacrifice, yet David once glimpsed him feasting alone on rich food while the group starved. The words of purity felt poisoned. Rachel whispered one night, "Don't ever look too close," her voice brittle, her eyes darting toward shadows. The enforcer's presence grew heavier, watching every flicker of doubt. Then came the day David saw Sarah kneeling in tears, begging forgiveness for questioning the leader's words. Thomas lifted her chin, smiling like a saint, but his whisper was sharp. "Your sin saves us all." That night, Sarah vanished. Her cot lay empty, blanket folded neatly. David's chest hollowed with dread because no one asked where she went. They all knew, but silence was survival. Whispers filled the night. David heard Rachel's voice tremble as she confessed, "Sarah's gone because she doubted." The words cut deeper than knives. He stared at her, searching for rebellion in her eyes, but saw only fear. "If you question him, you disappear," she whispered again, pulling her hands away from his. David's chest burned with rage and sorrow, but his tongue lay heavy. That night, he dreamed of Sarah, her eyes hollow, her lips whispering his name. He awoke drenched in sweat, only to see the enforcer standing in the doorway, watching him breathe. David froze, his heart pounding, every muscle aching with silence. The world inside those walls no longer felt like family. It was a graveyard in disguise. The truth came during a midnight gathering. Thomas stood beneath the moon, declaring that faith demanded proof. He spoke of chosen offerings, his tone calm, but his eyes burned with hunger. David felt the crowd tighten around him, their chants rising like waves. A girl no older than 16 was dragged forward, trembling. "She is reborn tonight," Thomas proclaimed. David's stomach turned as he saw the fear in her eyes, the innocence stolen. Rachel gripped his arm hard, whispering, "Don't move." David's teeth cut into his lip until blood welled, rage swelling against his ribs. The ritual fire flared as Thomas pressed his hand against the girl's head, chanting. David realized then, survival meant silence, but silence meant complicity in horrors. The betrayal came quietly. David overheard Rachel speaking with Thomas in hushed tones near the courtyard. "He asks too many questions," she whispered. Thomas smiled, laying a hand on her shoulder, his voice like velvet. "Then you must prove your devotion." David's body froze in the shadows. His heart thudded so hard he feared they could hear it. Rachel's voice cracked, "I'll do what's needed." Betrayal sank deeper than any wound. Later, she looked at him with soft eyes, whispering, "Stay close to me." Her hand brushed his as if in affection, but he felt the knife twisting inside. He knew then, loyalty demanded blood, and love was just another mask. Her face haunted him more than the shadows. The moment shattered him. At dawn, he was summoned to the circle. Rachel stood beside Thomas, eyes lowered, hands folded. "David doubts," Thomas declared, his voice steady, the words slicing through the air. Gasps rippled. David's breath faltered as all eyes turned on him. Rachel's lips trembled, but she did not speak. Her silence was the blade. "We test his faith," Thomas said, raising a hand. The circle closed in, chants growing. David's knees weakened, sweat pouring down his back. He felt the chains of loyalty turning into a noose. Betrayal burned in his chest, worse than fear. Rachel's eyes lifted for only a moment, and in them he saw sorrow, but also surrender. His world cracked, trust forever undone. The morning air cut like ice as David was dragged into the courtyard. His wrists bound with coarse rope, gravel digging into his knees. Thomas stood before him, voice booming. "Doubt is disease. Disease must be cut out." The chants rose, a storm of words drowning his pulse. David searched for Rachel's face among the crowd. She stared at the ground, her lips trembling but silent. The enforcer stepped forward, whip in hand, eyes cold as stone. David's chest heaved. "I will not break," he whispered, though his voice cracked. The first strike ripped fire across his back, sending blood splattering onto the stones. He bit down on his cry, refusing to give Thomas the satisfaction. Silence was his rebellion, but it burned like fire. The lashes blurred into one endless fire, but David clung to a memory, his sister's laughter, faint and distant, before the cult swallowed her. Blood dripped down his back, his vision swimming, yet his jaw stayed clenched. Thomas's voice thundered, "Confess and be cleansed." But David raised his head, eyes burning with defiance. "You are no savior," he rasped, his voice hoarse yet cutting. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Thomas's smile faltered, a flicker of anger sparking in his calm facade. The enforcer's arm lifted again, but hesitation clouded his gaze for a brief second. David caught it, a tiny fracture in the mask. Pain consumed him, but in that moment he realized, fear bound them all and cracks could spread. Night fell, but the punishment did not end. David was thrown into the prayer hall, wrists still bound, his blood leaving stains on the stone. The cult gathered around, torches blazing, faces blank masks of devotion. Thomas stepped into the center, his voice soft but sharp. Tonight he proves loyalty, or he dies. David's chest ached with each breath, but rage burned hotter than pain. He looked at Rachel, her eyes glistening, pleading silently for him to submit. "No," he said, the word small but heavier than any chant. A murmur spread, shock in the circle. Thomas's expression darkened, his hand lifting in silent command. David's body trembled, but his will locked like steel. If death came, it would not be kneeling. The enforcer stepped forward, whip lowered, his eyes fixed on David. Silence hung like a blade. David stared back, daring him. For the first time, Daniel's face shifted, doubt flickered, human and raw dawa. "Strike him," Thomas ordered, but Daniel's hand trembled. The crowd shifted uneasily, voices faltering in their chants. David's lips curled into a broken smile, his bloodied mouth whispering, "You fear him too." The words cracked the air like thunder. Daniel froze, torn between obedience and something buried deeper. Thomas's fury erupted, his voice no longer calm but savage. "Then I will finish it myself." He surged forward, robe swirling, hand raised. David braced, every nerve alight. The mask of divinity was breaking, revealing the man beneath. Chaos erupted. David lunged as Thomas approached, slamming his shoulder into him. The crowd gasped, torches flickering. The rope around his wrists tore against sharp stone, snapping free. He stumbled, blood soaking his shirt, but his legs carried him forward. "Stop him!" Thomas roared, but hesitation froze the circle. For one heartbeat, they all saw the leader bleed as he struck the ground. David ran, pushing past hands that reached too late. Rachel cried out his name, her voice breaking, but he didn't turn back. His lungs burned, each step tearing him open. The hall exploded in shouts, the enforcer torn between orders and doubt. David knew this was his only chance. Life or death lay in the sprint through darkness. David staggered into the forest, lungs tearing with each breath, blood soaking through his shirt. Behind him, voices echoed faintly, but none dared follow. He collapsed against a tree, bark biting into his skin, the night pressing heavy. "I made it," he whispered, though his voice broke with disbelief. Freedom should have felt sweet, but dread clung to him like damp fog. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper in the leaves like chants he could not unhear. He pressed his hands to his ears, yet the echoes lived inside him. The forest stretched endlessly, silent yet suffocating. His chest heaved as he looked at the sky, stars glimmering faintly. For the first time in years, there was no roof above him, yet he had never felt smaller. Morning light broke through, soft but cold. David awoke on damp ground, his body stiff and trembling. He dragged himself toward a stream, cupping shaking hands to drink. The reflection in the water stopped him. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken, yet more than that, he no longer recognized himself. "Who am I now?" he whispered, his voice cracked. He saw flashes of the circle, torches, Rachel's face turned away, Thomas's eyes burning with false divinity. The images replayed, burning deeper than scars. His hands shook, spilling water, as he realized survival was not freedom. The cult still lived inside him, woven into his blood and memory. The water rippled, distorting his reflection, as if the forest itself whispered that he would never be whole again. Days passed as David wandered, weak but moving forward. Each night he dreamed of chants, voices rising like waves, Rachel's whisper echoing, "Don't move." He woke with a start, heart pounding, sweat soaking his shirt. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but fear fed his thoughts more than emptiness. He wondered if anyone else had ever escaped, or if the forest was filled with their ghosts. Every crack of a twig made him flinch, expecting Daniel's hand or Thomas's voice. Instead, only silence greeted him, and silence was worse. It was in that silence he felt his guilt most. The weight of Sarah's disappearance, of Michael's screams, of Rachel's betrayal. Survival was a curse that demanded remembrance, and his memories never slept. He found an abandoned cabin on the edge of the woods. Its roof sagged, windows cracked, but to David it felt like sanctuary. He pushed inside, dust rising in the stale air. Collapsing onto the wooden floor, he let silence consume him. But even there, the cult followed. He heard chants in the creak of the boards, saw shadows in the flicker of light through broken glass. His hands shook as he pressed them over his face. "Stop," he begged, though there was no one to hear. He curled against the wall, body trembling, fighting sleep that promised nightmares. In that moment, he realized escape did not mean peace. Freedom was survival, but peace was gone forever. The chains were broken, yet the scars were endless. One evening, fireflies drifted in through a broken window. David sat still, watching them flicker like tiny torches. For the first time, he let himself cry, shoulders shaking, the sound raw and uncontained. "I'm alive," he whispered, but the words carried no triumph, only grief. He thought of Rachel, her silence, her eyes filled with sorrow. He thought of Sarah, gone into shadow. He thought of himself, chained by memory. The fireflies lit the room with gentle light, but in his mind, they looked like sparks from the ritual fires. He closed his eyes, but the chants rose again, echoing in his chest. Escape had given him breath, but not freedom. And in the silence he understood, he would never truly be free. Nights bled into weeks. David learned to build fires, to find food, to walk further into the world that once seemed unreachable. But survival did not erase memory. Each night he lay awake, listening to silence that was never silent. The chants lived in the rhythm of his heartbeat, in the crackle of flames, in the sigh of the trees. He whispered to himself, "They're gone. They can't touch me." Yet the words never silenced the shadows. Sometimes in the edge of sleep, he saw Rachel's face, whispering his name with tears in her eyes. He woke, gasping, clutching at his chest. He knew then that escape had not saved him. It had only delivered him into a prison without walls, where freedom was haunted by ghosts. One evening he reached the edge of a small town. Lights glimmered in windows, voices carried laughter across the street. He froze at the edge, hidden by shadows. His legs trembled with longing, but fear rooted him. He wanted to step forward, to beg someone to hear his story, yet the words burned inside his throat. "What if they see me?" he thought. "What if they know?" The faces of strangers blurred into masks of the cult, every laugh twisting into chants. He turned away, heart racing, choosing the forest again. Safety was no longer in people, but in distance. The world he once craved now looked like a stage where shadows waited, ready to swallow him if he dared to walk closer. Sleep brought no peace. David dreamed of the circle, of torches blazing, of Thomas's voice whispering, "You are ours forever." He jolted awake, clawing at the ground, sweat soaking his shirt. His chest heaved as he whispered, "It's not real." But the fireflies outside his window flickered in rhythm with chants he remembered. He pressed his hands to his ears, rocking back and forth, but the voices lived inside. He thought of Sarah, of Michael, of Rachel, of all the faces swallowed by silence. He realized the truth. The cult did not end with walls or chains. It lived inside the survivors, carved into their bones. And though he had fled their reach, he would never flee their echoes. The forest grew quieter with each day, but silence was no gift. David carried the weight of voices everywhere he went. He spoke aloud to trees, to rivers, to shadows, desperate to fill the emptiness. "You can't take me back," he whispered often, as though someone was listening. One night he carved words into the cabin wall. "I am still here." His hand trembled as he etched the letters, tears streaking his face. He stepped back, staring at them, unsure if it was a victory or confession. The words mocked him because in the silence, he realized survival was not life. It was a reminder, and the reminder screamed louder each day. On the final night, he sat in the doorway of the cabin, the forest stretching before him. The wind carried faint echoes, though the night was still. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Only two of us ever made it out." His hands trembled because he knew even that truth was uncertain. Maybe Rachel had survived. Maybe not. His tears fell into the dirt, his body shaking with exhaustion. He looked to the sky, stars sharp and cold. His lips parted once more, softer than a breath. I still hear them chanting in my dreams. The silence that followed pressed harder than screams, heavier than chains. And with it, the story ended, not with freedom, but with scars that would never close.